Okay, so thanks very much, Pat and the team here at Volac, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes about contract rearing of replacement heifers. Right, I'd like everyone in the audience to look to their left and to look to their right. And there's a very good chance that in the next 5 years, one of the three people that you're looking at, yourself or the two either side of you, will be thinking, if not doing, contract rearing. Right? Maybe not as a rearer, but possibly as someone who owns heifers and putting them on someone else's farms. So in my talk, what I hope to do today is to cover 3 or 4 key areas in terms of contract rearing. I won't have time to go into all the nitty-gritty. I'm just going to cover a couple of the angles. I've spoken ad nauseum about the experience in New Zealand. We'll look at that for a second. I'll then explain why I think there's going to be a big increase in heifer rearing over the next number of years. Then I look at just three key aspects out of a multitude of aspects I could have looked at that might affect your consideration of heifer rearing. One is about finding the right person as a rearer or as an owner for heifers, who the right person is going to be. The second thing is, and it's the one that all the questions come to me on when I talk about heifer rearing, is how much are we going to charge? Well, I'm not going to tell you how much you're going to charge, but I'm going to tell you how you might go about deciding on a price to charge if you're a rearer, and how much you can afford to pay if you're an owner. And finally, I was going to focus for 1 or 2 minutes on the whole disease issue, because the disease issue is one of the big ones going forward when we look at the multiplicity of diseases that are out there. So let's start off first of all on the New Zealand experience, and just a couple of key stats on New Zealand. I've been over there quite a number of times at this stage. My family over there now as well, so it's a place I call like a second home to myself. We have they've lots of experience of off-farm rearing of heifers in New Zealand. About 1 million weanling heifers go off every year, and about 1.25 million yearling heifers are off every year. About 95% of weanlings and about practically 99% of 2-year-old heifers are off-farm. The systems are fairly defined over there. They generally go off at 3 months of age, and they stay off until about 21 or 22 months of age. So they're off for a prolonged period of time. We went over specifically, myself and John Dunworth, went over specifically in 2008, again there to get a look at the systems that were in place. And the first fact that struck me was, 2 things struck me about it. Number one, we place huge emphasis on getting the highest genetic merit animals on the ground, so we try to breed all our heifers. In New Zealand, nearly no one breeds heifers to AI. They use stock bulls. Why? Because heifers are off-farm. They're on farms further and further from the dairying areas, and the people that put the heifers on the farm, they don't want the hassle of bringing large numbers of heifers in to mate them every day. So practically no one uses AI on heifers that are being contract reared. It takes the hassle out of it. This guy here has 4 lots of stock, 800 heifers on the farm from 4 different operators. No AI going on. It's all stock bulls sent by the owners before the start of the breeding season. And there's companies that specialise in hiring in or supplying stock bulls for hire for the breeding seasons over there. And the second thing that struck me about contract rearing in New Zealand, or heifer grazing they call it over there, is that while there are some extremely good operators at heifer rearing over there, most dairy farmers they talk to have had 1 or 2 bad experiences as well. They think when they put the heifers off on the rearers' farms, that's it, they need to worry about them for 2 years. You need, and I'll come back to it again and again to talk, it's about the quality of the person you're putting the heifers on is just as important as anything else. You need to get top-class people, because we've seen from all the presentations here today that heifer rearing is an extremely specialised business, and it's critical that heifers are well reared if they're to perform well subsequently. Okay. Looking forward to the dairy industry here in Ireland in just a few years' time at this stage, we're told that on average the stocking rate on dairy farms is going to be 2.2 livestock units per hectare. Currently, it's around 2 livestock units per hectare. I went back to the database in the Profit Monitor database to find a kind of a spread of stocking rates averaging around 2.2 livestock units per hectare. Because what I wanted to see was the farms that are going to be most stressed in terms of stocking rate, and they're the farms at the highest stocking rates. And what I determined from that data is that about 20% of farms, when the stocking rate averages 2.2 livestock units per hectare, 20%, 1 in 5 farms, will be stocked at over a cow to the acre. And you can see that trend emerging already. Some of the really top class operators are stocked at 2.6, 2.8 livestock units per hectare. And some of them are stocked at maybe 3 or 3.25 on the milking platforms. So stocking rate, the pressure is on to keep more stock on milking platforms at the moment as we embrace expansion on dairy farms. But what that also means is that the pressure will also be on farmers to grow more grass if they're to expand profitably in the future. And for some individuals, the choice may well be, when they go to high stocking rates, it may well be to move heifers off farm. And I would envisage that within 5 years, about 1 in 5 farms will be stocked, 1 in 5 dairy farms will be highly stocked, will need to grow 12, 13 or 14 tonnes of grass, and to do it profitably, they'll have to be really doing that kind of a situation. The second thing we've been told about the dairy by 2020 is that on average, the dairy herds at that time will be dairy herds averaging 85 cows. Again, there's going to be a huge range there in terms of herd size. So if I looked at the database from, I think it's 2014 from Profit Monitor, what I find is that in the green band there, the bottom group there, where's it at all, that band there, the 3/4 of farms with herd size averaging 85 cows, 3/4 of farms will have less than 100 cows on their farms. But significantly, 1/4 of farms will be more than 100 cows. 4 out of every 5 of those herds will be between 100 and 200 cows, and 5%, or 1 herd in 20, is likely to contain more than 200 cows. Now, when you're rearing larger numbers of cows on your farms, it's also likely you'll have larger numbers of heifer calves on your farms. So some of these operators with 300 and 400 cows, or even with 200 cows, could easily be rearing 40, 50, 60, 70 heifers per annum on their farms. And that brings me back to my first point. I said to look left and to look right. Because what this data tells us is that by 2020 or maybe 2021, between 3,000 and 5,000 dairy farmers will face challenges either due to stocking rate or due to large scale of their dairy enterprises. So if it's as many as 5,000, it could be 1 in 3 farms. The person on your left, yourself, or the person on your right could face some of these challenges into future. And one of the options that you will be considering at that stage will be the option for contract rearing. I have 3 issues I want to cover then of the multitude of issues that are there with regard to contract rearing. And the first is about partnerships. And partnerships, a contract rearing initiative is effectively a partnership. It's a partnership between 2 people, the owner of the stock and the rearer of the stock. And why contract rearing, where it doesn't work out because there's a mismatch of the 2 parties involved. Some people think they can jump on the heifer rearing wagon and take money from the dairy farmer, and that's happened in some instances in New Zealand, just as this potentially could happen here. So if you as a dairy farmer wish to engage in contract rearing, you need to have a partnership that will include things like trustworthiness, communication and shared objectives. It's absolutely critical that a couple of things happen, that you meet fairly frequently, not every day or anything like that, but that you meet in advance of sending heifers to someone. They're your animals, you want them reared well. You've got to go to the farm, see the standard of farming that's going on the rearer's farm. And equally for the rearer, he's got to go to your farm and see what your expectations are and get a measure of how you're going to perform when the heifers go back. And from a rearer's perspective, a good portion of his income may well become tied up in another person, so he's got to have a trust and be able to work with that person as well. So heifer rearing is a huge partnership of 2 individuals, and they've got to work well together. You've got to really measure up this person before you engage with them. Emer spoke about, in the first session, she spoke about this €1,500 per heifer. It's what it costs to rear a heifer. But there's variation around that figure. There's significant variation around it. Just as there's variation in terms of scale on Irish dairy farms, and there's variation in terms of stocking rate. There's also variation in terms of efficiency with which heifers are reared. So Emer talks about €1,500. Where is that money being spent? The money is spent on the value of the heifer, €300 or €400 per head. It's spent on labour, your own labour. and you need to put a charge in for that. So in the whole heifer rearing process, on average, you'll spend about 20 hours per livestock per heifer rearing it to calve at 2 years of age. That's worth about €240. Your land or someone else's land is occupied in rearing that heifer. And that land is worth approximately is valued at around €200 of an opportunity cost per hectare as well. So on top of land, on top of the heifer value, and on top of your labour, there are other costs to be included. Fixed costs, such as carries, beef phone, depreciation, running machine costs, and variable costs, feed and fertiliser, contractor, all that kind of stuff. And it's these costs that I've expressed here in terms of variation, the fixed and variable costs, excluding land, labour, and heifer value, on this scale here. And this comes from the Profit Monitor for 2014, and it's expressed in euro per livestock unit. A livestock unit is a heifer that's carried from 0 to 2 years of age, so it's a 24-month period. And the range there is quite considerable. In terms of cost, we see a range of around €370 of a differential, or averaging around €750 for the average guy, or 700 odd euro, but ranging from 530 up to 909 for those costs, excluding labour, land, and heifer opportunity costs. So there's huge variation. And for the rearer and for the owner, they need to establish what it's currently costing them to rear their heifers before they even consider the heifer rearing option. And secondly, the consideration that also needs to be borne in mind is that there's considerable variation between seasons. So, for example, we normally expect that the grazing season is the cheaper season for rearing heifers. So one mightn't expect that the costs incurred across the summer will be as great as they will be when animals are housed. But equally, if you look here at this slide here, in the first summer and first winter, for one individual who was trying to cost it out for himself, there's a 50% increase in the costs on a per day basis that he'd need to charge to make any money for himself between the first summer and the first winter. Normally heifers will go home, there's a variance of systems here, but normally heifers go home at the end of the second grazing season. But if the rearer chooses or has been asked by the owner of the heifers to keep them for longer, the costs are also considerably higher. Why? Because the animals are indoors, so they're on a forage-based diet, or likely to be indoors on a forage-based diet, which costs a lot more than a grass-based diet. And secondly, they're considerably larger, so their dry matter intake is considerably more. So that second winter is an extremely costly winter. So in any calculations that are being done, the rearer of the animals and the owner of the animals need to establish what it's going to cost to rear those animals and leave a profit for both parties.
George, on that slide, will you just quickly go through what costs are in?
Okay, on the left or the right?
On the right, at the 180 for the second winter, or
okay.
the grass.
So the 180 for the second winter for this particular individual, it's on an individual farm now, that's if it is, will include forage costs. They'll account for about €1 per animal per day. There's a margin for the rearer for the labour involved in keeping those animals for the extra day, and there's a small margin included there for the associated fixed costs over the second winter period on that particular farm. And they were what the costs worked out for his farm. So as I said in the first slide, there's going to be variance, and what one person can do it profitably for, there'll be quite a bit of variance between farms, but equally on an individual farm between seasons, there's considerable variation as well. Is that okay, Doreen? Okay. And just finally on this slide here, the disease issue. There's a couple of things to be done. Number one, for both owner and rearer, they need to know that there's a high standard of disease and husbandry associated with disease control on farm. I put this slide up at a presentation I gave for AHI a few months ago, and it shows the green, the amber, and the red, where the levels of risks are become progressively higher from one step to the next. So in addition to knowing the whole regulatory issue, there's also a multiplication of disease risk when animals from more than one source have been reared on one farm. So one has to set a kind of a standard of protocols in place to ensure that the animals going from your farm to the rearer's farm are of the highest standard, and equally, if they're on farm and there are more than one groups of animals together on that farm, that there are procedures in place to minimise the risk of disease. not just being acquired by the animals on the farm, but when they return home to the owner's farm, that they don't introduce some new disease onto that farm. And from the disease risks are a kind of a stepwise process. Where there's just one group of animals on farm, the disease risk tends to be lower. And obviously, where there are more than one herd, where there's 2 herds, and then subsequently multiple herds being reared on the one farm, the risks increase the more than quadruple with the greater number of herds on farms. So it's to be borne in mind that the disease issue is an issue that has to be talked about very carefully between owner and rearer before animals are transferred from the owner's farm to the rearer's farm, and equally the disease protocols put in place before animals return home. So it's a huge, huge issue, and there's a lot of talk about not just the regulatory diseases but the non-regulatory stuff because of the prevalence of a wide range of diseases in the Irish national herd. So Teagasc has help available for you. We've prepared specimen documents. These are contract agreements that can be used as templates for a contract that you might draw up between owner and rearer. Okay. As I said, the most important people you're dealing with are the rearer and the owner. What's put on paper, the contracts are a useful reminder. They're a useful reminder of the issues that need to be addressed. They're not going to guarantee that heifers are reared well. Don't ever think they will. They will not. But they're a useful reminder of the different issues that can be put up. We have a guideline document there as well to remind you of the issues that need to be covered in any contract and that you need to consider before, during and after heifers are moved. And we have a calculator on the website which will help you to establish the cost of rearing heifers on your farm with some guideline estimates of costs that may be incurred along the way. So I suppose in summary, what am I saying? I'm saying firstly that there's likely to be a large increase in contract rearing on Irish farms in the next number of years. The 3 messages I covered here today on top of that were firstly to identify the right people to work together, be very careful who you engage in a partnership with to rear heifers, because it will have an effect on your heifers in the long term, and he's rearing them for quite a period of time. Establish your own price, not the price that your neighbour is getting, because your costs may well be different to someone else's. And there's help there on the website to allow you to establish costs for your farm. And be very careful. Speak to your vet. Speak to the DVO, yours and whoever the rearer is, before heifers are sent off, and establish a very appropriate and particular animal health plan for your farm. And the best of luck with it in the future.